Okay, I'm still going to mute everyone because you can hear each other. All right, so welcome back. So this is our 7th class as we attempt together to work on our bitachon, our trust and our faith in God. And we're now studying the 3rd chapter of Shaar Habitachon, the Treatise on Trust. And at the beginning of the 3rd chapter, Rabbeinu Bachya introduces that there are certain introductions, points that if one is clear on them and understands them and recognizes the truth of them, so that will greatly assist a person in developing their bitachon, their faith in God, and their reliance on God. And the first condition was to recognize and understand the 7 reasons that one should trust in another, and to recognize that those are all true and present in the Creator. And the 7 factors, just very quickly and short, were that God is compassionate and loving, God is not forgetful and is attentive to our needs, does not neglect us, is not distracted. God is omnipotent, capable, strong, and can do as he pleases. That God knows what is good for us and what is best for us. And that we are under God's care from the moment we are conceived until and forever on. As long as we continue to exist, we continue to be under the same care of the same being. Number 6 is that it's all matters that relate to us are entirely in our hands, and nobody else can intervene and do something against us or for us without God allowing it. And finally, number 7 was that God is generous and kind even when we are not deserving. And that continues without interruption. So those were the 7 as reflected really in chapter 2 as he originally introduced them. And then, as we mentioned in chapter 3, he goes into more detail and describes how each of those conditions are true and existent when it comes to God. And I mentioned last week that some of them don't necessarily line up between chapter 2 and chapter 3. And one of the ones that appears in chapter 3 that doesn't seem to appear in chapter 2 is the 7th on the list in chapter 3. The 7th condition, the 7th reason, doesn't seem to line up with any of the conditions mentioned in chapter 2. The commentaries do try to say, no, really it does. It corresponds to number 5, but we're not going to really focus on it. We're looking at it as like an independent thing, although it builds on some of the other ones. So that's what we're going to focus on today, and that's on the source sheet. If you have it, it's still there even if you don't have it. We'll start by reading from the first source. So this is again in chapter 3 of, it just says Chovos HaLevavos chapter 3. It's really Chovos HaLevavos Shaar Habitachon, the Treatise on Trust, chapter 3. And here is the 7th condition, the 7th reason that God is the ultimate being that we should place our reliance in. And he writes, and before I actually read what he writes, I should just say that we're going to have to work through this together. It relates to what we talked about last week. These are not necessarily the easiest ideas to wrap our minds around. And so what we'll do today is really actually just try to work through it as best we could. So number 7, that one clearly realizes that all existing things in this world, whether purposeful or accidental, have predetermined limits which cannot be increased or decreased from what the Creator has decreed, whether in amount, quality, time, or place. So to develop our bitachon, we should clarify for ourselves that all that exists, he refers to, in Hebrew, me'etzem umikra, purposeful or accidental. Hard to understand what he means by that. Some understand, I think it means just the difference between those beings who act in a more accidental way or without free will versus human beings who are purposeful. But everything that exists and everything that happens has gvul yadua, predetermined limits, which cannot be increased or decreased from what the Creator has decreed, whether in amount. So whatever the Creator has decreed will be the amount of anything that exists. It can't be increased or decreased, whether in quality, whether in time, or whether in place. And then he goes in and elaborates on that. It cannot be numerous if the Creator decreed that it should be few, nor few if the Creator decreed it numerous. A person can't change what God has decreed to be numerous and make it few, or vice versa. Nor come late if decreed to come early, nor come early if decreed to come late. Any occurrence that God decrees will come at a certain time, we cannot move up that time and make it happen earlier, or if it again is decreed at a certain time, we can't make it happen later. Everything will happen as it is decreed that it will happen by God. And the last one, which he doesn't elaborate on, was place. Wherever it's meant to happen, we can't, whatever, if something is decreed to happen in a certain place, we cannot change that. And if something appears to be contrary to this, really, it was already pre-decreed with foresight, only that all decrees are implemented through causes and means, or cause and effect, which in turn have causes and means. Meaning that sometimes it appears that things happen because of, that we do have control over when things happen and how things happen, and I can decide what should happen right now, and it looks like because I do one act, that brought about a specific result. So Rabbeinu Bachya says that's not the case. It looks like it, but do you know how many causes and effects led up to that event taking place? And it was all pre-decreed with God's foresight that there would be this conglomeration, or this, this all these events coming together to bring about any given result. One who does not understand the matters of this world thinks that an immediate cause will force a change in matters, which in turn cause more changes, that present events constantly reshape the future. But he's saying that's not so. That's not so, that present events are what ultimately are the cause of what appears to be happening. It's really a combination of many events that God has allowed to take place and determined that they should take place, and those come together to create a given outcome. So this runs us right into very difficult theological questions about, determinism and, God's foresight, divine foresight versus free will. If God knows what's going to happen, then do we really have free will? That's a question that is discussed at length in the early commentators, but this is actually, I think, goes a step further. The way that what he seems to be saying, right? It's one thing to say God knows what will happen, but I still can choose what I'm going to do. Just God knows what I'm going to choose. That is a question that the commentators grapple with, philosophers grapple with. Doesn't bother me so much. God is beyond time. God can know what I'm going to do. What he's describing here, to me, is like a step above that. which is that it's not just that God knows what's going to happen, it's that God has decreed what's going to happen. And if God has already decreed what's going to happen, then do I have free will? Whatever is going to happen is going to happen. Now, we've mentioned already, really based on Hishtadlus' approach, with that we can say that I have free will, but free will just gives me the ability to choose what I want to do. But whether whether my choice results in the desired outcome that I'm aiming for, so that is not up to me. So my free will gives me the ability to attempt to do something, to make a choice. That's my free will. But whether whether there will be the desired result is that's up to whether God decrees that result should come about. So that's I guess step one. Or the question that really is difficult, we'll get more into it, but is this true for like everything? Is this true? Are there different degrees of this? Depending on how significant a decree we're dealing with, does God care to decree every single detail in every person's life? So it certainly sounds like he's saying that, and there's certainly those who will say that. Just an example, perhaps, where from Tanakh, where we see something like this play out, so, or at least expressed, is in the story of Esther, in the story of the Megillah Esther. So in Esther, we certainly have we see this cause and effect, right? We certainly see that an end result was brought about by many different things that all came together. So at the end of the Purim story, so a person might look and say, well, the Jewish people were saved because Achashverosh, killed Haman. Or you can say they were saved because he put out a new decree that the Jewish people could defend themselves. Of course, that had, a whole causing effect that led to that. It wasn't just he decided to that. That was the decree that was going to happen. And there were many events that led up to that. But in the middle of the story, or towards the beginning, Mordechai actually turns to Esther when he realizes what's going on. And he says to Esther, he sends her a message, you have to intervene. And if you don't, he says, if you're silent, there will be, basically, salvation will come to the Jewish people from some other place. Mordechai recognized that Esther was put in the palace for a reason, that God was engineering things for the salvation of the Jewish people. So he recognized that God did indeed want to save the Jewish people. If that's the decree, if that is what God wants to do, if that's God's decision, so Mordechai says, it's going to come about one way or another. So Esther, either it could come through you, or it will come through someone else. And in fact, he goes on and he says in that verse, he says, it will come, the salvation will come from somewhere else, and you'll be destroyed. Because if you're not fulfilling your purpose, then God doesn't need you anymore for to be the queen. And he says, who knows? This seems to be why you became the queen. So there you have an example, I think, of where there's a divine decree. Mordechai recognizes that there's an end game. There's a decision, a decree that God has that the Jewish people are going to be saved. And nobody can change that. Nobody can change that. You can, if it doesn't come about through one path, so God has other paths that can bring it about. So, but at the same time, we're saying that Esther has a free will choice here. She can either step up and be a part of bringing about the salvation, or she could be, not be a part of that. So here we have like a decree that it's going to happen. It's just a matter of how it's going to happen. So that's like a grand example. The Jewish people are going to be saved. It's just a question of how it's going to happen. But if we kind of like zoom in, so on Esther herself, let's say, so is there a divine decree that Esther will end up in the throne room of Ahasuerus? It sounds like not, because she's given that choice. Is she going to go to the king or is she not? So that's this like juggle here. Like, how much do we mean is the way that he's presenting it sounds like you can't control what's going to happen is going to happen. But then do we have no choices? Like, we think we have choices, but we don't have choices. So it's a difficult paragraph to read. Again, let's just to get to the point, to go, nothing, he says, you can't change anything, you can't make something come early or late. Fine. So the salvation of the Jewish people, that's an example. It will happen exactly when God determines that it was supposed to happen. And if it doesn't come through Esther, it'll come through someone else. But is Esther's role predetermined? It sounds like not. It sounds like she's being given the choice to either be a part of this or not. And it's not guaranteed. There's no she's for sure going to be a part of it. So this is part of the struggle to what I just don't know how much he means is predetermined, or if there are certain bigger picture decrees. Those are things we don't have control of changing. Where something that has a role in God's scheme, we can't change a decree. But in terms of getting there, how it comes about on a smaller scale, it's hard to understand what it would mean that we can't change our fate in any way. We'll come back to that question shortly. Again, if anybody does want to ask a question, I can't hear you for some reason, so you'll have to just do it in the chat. Okay, let's read a few more lines which is the second box here, where he goes on and he says, to busy oneself in trying to bring early what the Creator decreed would come later, or to try to delay what was decreed to come early, or to try to make numerous what was decreed to be few, or to try to diminish what was decreed to be numerous in worldly possessions, basically is foolish, unless it causes strengthening of his service or accepting his Torah. All this is due, if one does it not for that purpose, which we'll get back to in a moment, it's due to weakness in the recognition of God's all-knowing understanding and foolishness in failing to understand the benevolent character of God's conduct. So again, he's referring to what is decreed. To bring early what the Creator decreed would come later, to try to delay what was decreed to come early, or to try to make numerous what was decreed to be few, or to try to diminish what was decreed to be numerous. Is everything decreed? Or is this referring to specific things, that there are some things that are decreed, that are major important life events, or either for an individual or for a community, or for the Jewish people at large, for the world at large. So perhaps there are certain things that we would say are decreed, and then there are things that are not included in decreed. I don't know. It's not clear. But what is clear is that he's saying that anything that is decreed, we can't change. And to try to change it, he's saying, is number one, shows a weakness in the recognition of God's all-knowing understanding of us and our needs, the commentaries say. So God knows what we need, so why are we trying to change it through our own efforts. And number two, it shows a foolishness in failing to understand the benevolent character of God's conduct. Again, trying to alter God's decrees when God is benevolent. So that shows that we don't recognize God's goodness. Okay, another difficult paragraph. It's good that I can't hear anyone, because I'm sure the questions would be coming much harder and faster if you didn't have to type them in. So we're going to see that Clovis Halavos does not believe that nobody should do anything, right? And nobody should try to do anything. And he's going to make that very clear, that we are supposed to put in effort, right? We're not supposed to just sit on the couch and say, well, whatever happens, happens. So what he seems to be referring to here, though, is after a person puts in their effort, where they kind of try to push the envelope, and they say, and they made their attempts, they made their efforts, and things worked out a certain way. So they say, no, I'm not accepting I'm not accepting the result. I'm going to keep trying. So, and I'm just gonna try harder, try more. So there's going to be a point where, in his view, that's no longer the right thing to do, where there has to be an acceptance. Person put in their effort, they did what they were supposed to do. God wants the person to put in their effort. If that effort didn't bear fruit, that means God does not want it to bear fruit under the current circumstances. And to try to force something through, he's calling that a weakness in the recognition of God's all-knowing understanding of us and our needs, and a foolishness in not recognizing the benevolence of God's conducts. Now, he does throw in an exception in the middle of that paragraph, and he says that unless, the translation here is, unless it causes strengthening of his service or accepting his Torah. So what does that mean? In the Hebrew, it's mibli sibe vel kiyum mitzvos avodasa v'kibol torasa. So there are a couple of explanations for what he might mean by this. So one idea is that there's a concept in the Talmud, the sages, that everything is in the hands of heaven except for Yirah Shamayim, fear of heaven. Everything is in the hands of heaven except for fear of heaven. In other words, that we are entirely in control of our own spiritual level. That is not predetermined. It's not decreed. There's no decree on where we will be spiritually. That's entirely up to us. And so there's no point where we say, you tried, but obviously God has decreed that this is where you're supposed to be, and you should accept it and stop trying. That's something we would say for something material, for our livelihood or whatever, something like that. But for spiritual pursuits, so I tried, and I reached this level in my spiritual growth. But if I can't get higher, it seems that that's where I'm predetermined to be, and I'm going to leave it at that. So what it's telling us here is, no, we don't say that when it comes to spiritual growth. When it comes to spiritual growth, there's no stopping. And so whatever efforts a person is putting in, if that is related to one's spiritual growth, so they should continue to put in those efforts. That's one understanding. Another understanding is that although, and this is that's how the first way I said is how most commentaries understand it. The second way is based on Rabbi Matisyahu Solomon. So he explains that it's true when we have put in our effort and we did what we were supposed to do. So we should accept that this is the result. So that's true in terms of putting in more physical effort. But in terms of now investing spiritual effort, in other words, praying, studying Torah as a merit for a change, So that's different. That's how he understands this line. That we come to a situation, a challenge. We try to resolve it. So, and we put in our effort. If we put in our physical effort, it didn't have a result. So again, figuring out at what point we say, that's we did our Hishtadlus, we did our effort, and we should accept God's decree is a difficult question. And when we get to the section on Hishtadlus, we'll try to work it out, I hope. But and I don't think we'll fully work it out, but we'll try. But whenever we've reached that point where we've invested ourselves, we put in our effort, it didn't bear fruit. We recognize this is what God wants for us in our current situation. But if we change our spiritual state through prayer, through Torah study, so then it could be that that which is proper for us now changes. Not only that, but by praying, we're turning to God and saying, I recognize that you're in control here. So I'm not trying, I recognize this is what you've decreed. And I'm not going to try to push the envelope and think that I can change your decree myself. But through prayer, that's a different story. Through prayer, maybe I can change that which God has decreed for me. So that's how he explains this idea, this exception that we can change, we can delay, we can change that which is supposed to come later, can come earlier or earlier, later, or numerous, fewer, through prayer and through Torah study and other forms of mitzvos, of spiritual growth. In terms of this overall question, about does it what the Chovos HaLevavos seems to be saying here is everything is determined, and you can't add to whatever God determined. God determines a specific livelihood for a person. All the effort that we make will not change what our livelihood is going to be. Really, there's a statement in the Talmud that sounds like that. It says the livelihood of a person is determined on Rosh Hashanah for that coming year. But it's not so easy to relate to such an idea, because you look at the world and you see that based on the decisions that people make, they have different livelihoods. A person decides to pursue a career that pays better, whatever it might be, hedge fund, doctor, lawyer, we can agree those generally pay better than a teacher. So one person chooses to be a teacher and one person chooses to be a lawyer. So who's making more money? Probably, and 90% of the time it's the lawyer. Now, sometimes the person who tries to be a lawyer, it doesn't work out. So you'll say, you see, right, that there we have it. We're not in control. Obviously the ones who it worked out for, it was determined by God that they should have a good livelihood. And if God determined that they shouldn't have a good livelihood, it won't work out. They won't find a job, or they won't finish school, or whatever it might be. Okay, one can say that. The problem is that you look at the world and still, you look at the percentages, and most of the, a much higher percentage of people who pursue careers that pay better end up getting paid better, and people who pursue careers that pay less end up earning less. So is that all? If it's all just predetermined, then it should just maybe be more random, because it doesn't matter what career I choose. Whatever God has decided that I should earn this coming year, that's what I'm going to earn. So it's a little bit difficult to understand this whole concept. One of the Kollel members in Ner Yisrael, he's now, I think, took a job in one of the other yeshivas in Baltimore. His name is Rabbi David Jaffe. So he wrote actually like a 30-page booklet about Bitachon. and really trying to work through a lot of these difficult issues. And someone shared it with me. So he raises this point and tries to work through it and figure out if we can an approach that would make sense. So one suggestion that he brings is that those that God predetermined that they should earn more livelihood, God endowed those people with a desire and the skills and the personality to pursue certain types of careers. And people that God determined should earn less, he endowed them with personality to pursue other types of careers. That's what some have tried to suggest. It doesn't seem to sit so well with me. It didn't sit so well with him either. First of all, there's exceptions to that too. Sometimes somebody doesn't have a personality, but they're pressured into pursuing a certain career, so they end up choosing it, even though they're not endowed with that type of personality or skills to pursue something, and it could end up working out still. So that's a little bit of a difficult approach. One approach that he kind of settles on, although it's not clear that this can work for the Chovos HaLevavos, is based on an idea that appears in the responsum of the Rashbash. The Rashbash, I don't remember what his name was, but he, I think, was from North Africa in like the 1600s or so. So he actually is dealing with an interesting question. The question he's dealing with is, just like we say with livelihood, things are predetermined. So with life also, right? On Rosh Hashanah, it's determined who will live and who will die that coming year. So if it's predetermined, so does it really matter what I do in terms of my health? The specific question that he's dealing with is, the person finds themselves in the height of a plague, of a pandemic. There's a plague ravaging the town, should they run away and run to a different town where they won't get sick? Well, maybe you'll say, what's the difference? If it was decreed that they're going to die this year, they'll die this year. If it was decreed that they're not going to die this year, they're not going to die this year. So why run away? So he says that it's true. If it was decreed that they're going to die this year, then it won't help to run away. If it was decreed that they're not going to die this year, then they really don't need to run away. But what if it was decreed that neither? It's not determined necessarily what's going to happen, or the way that it's quoted here is that it could be that God decreed that if they run away, then they will be saved, and if they don't run away, then they'll die. So therefore, he says you should run away. So he wants to make a similar argument over here with livelihood. It could be that there are people that God says, this person this year is going to rake it in. He gets a decree on Rosh Hashanah that this year he's going to win big. And there it doesn't really matter, as long as he does a limited amount of Hishtadlus, of effort, which is required, but maybe even if he didn't, but certainly if he did, then there's going to be a windfall and he's somehow going to make a lot of money, he or she. If God decreed that they're going to be poor that year, they're going to be poor that year. But there might be people that God decrees that if they put in the effort, they'll be able to make earn a lot this year. If they put in extra effort, if they work overtime, so that could be all built into the decree, that if they put in the effort, then they'll be able to earn a greater livelihood. Again, you can't override an existing decree. If the decree was that the person will be poor, they're going to be poor. It doesn't matter how much they try, how many hours they work overtime. In the end, it's not going to work out. If the decree was they'll be rich, then whatever they do, it's going to work out somehow. But there could be people in the middle that God's decree for them is according to the effort that they put in to earn a livelihood. That's how much they'll be able to earn. Not clear, though, that we can read that into Chovos Halavavos here. He kind of seems to say there's no point of putting in extra effort. Well, if it was true that that there could be people who there is a point for, right? Because if he agreed that there could be people who the decree is if they put in extra effort, then they'll be able to bring about a different result, then they should put in the extra effort just in case. Why not? So it's a little unclear if that can be read into the Chovos Halavavos or not. I want to conclude with something related to this week's Torah portion, which I think really relates to what we're talking about. And I heard this from Rabbi David Foreman, and it really is exactly about our topic, about bitachon, and specifically when it comes to one's livelihood. And the key, one of the prime examples of how God sustains us is when we're in the desert, and God is sustaining us with the manna that falls from heaven. And there we see, with clearly that it is God who provides our livelihood. So I included on the source sheet. This is chapter 16 in this week's Torah portion, Parshas Beshalach, and there we'll read a number of verses quickly here. It says that they journeyed from Elim, and the entire community of the children of Israel came to the desert of Sin, which is between Elim and Sinai, on the 15th day of the second month after their departure from the land of Egypt. So they come to Midbar Sin, and the entire community of the children of Israel complained against Moses and against Aaron in the desert. And they complained. This is the second time that they complained in this week's portion. They had complained about water previously. Now they're complaining that. Verse 3, the children of Israel said to them, if only we had died by the hand of the Lord in the land of Egypt, when we sat by pots of meat, when we ate bread to our fill, for you have brought us into this desert to starve this entire congregation to death. We're going to starve, but there's no sustenance here. So the Lord said to Moses, behold, I am going to rain down for you bread from heaven, and the people shall go out and gather what is needed for the day, so that I can test them whether or not they will follow my teaching. And it shall be on the sixth day that so let's just point out, he says, so that I can test them. So you're going to give them the manna, but it's described as so that I can test them whether or not they will follow my teaching. What's going to be the test? So let's see. And it shall be on the sixth day that when they prepare what they will bring, it will be double of what they gather every day. So on Fridays, they'll get a double portion so that they'll have for Shabbos as well, for Shabbat, and they won't have to gather on Shabbos. Now it fast forwards to verse 16, and the manna has fallen, and they say, this is the thing that the Lord has commanded. Gather of it each one according to his eating capacity, an omer for each person, according to the number of persons, each one for those in his tent you shall take. So this is the first law of the man. You're only allowed to take an omer measurement per person. That's a measurement, an omer, only an omer per person. And the children of Israel did so. They gathered both the one who gathered much and the one who gathered a little. Apparently, some people gathered an omer per person and some people gathered more. Turn to the next page. And they measured it with an omer. And whoever gathered much did not have more. And whoever gathered little did not have less. Each one according to his eating capacity they gathered. It didn't matter what they actually did. Everybody ended up with an omer. So that was the law number one. You were only allowed to gather an omer measurement, and everybody ended up with an omer measurement. And Moses said to them, let no one leave over any of it until morning. You're not allowed to save for tomorrow, right? You're not allowed to save. Here they are. They're in the desert. They have no sustenance. They're completely relying on God. You might want to save for tomorrow. Moshe says you're not allowed to save. So verse 20 says, but some men did not obey Moses and left over some of it until morning. So some did save. They saved for tomorrow. And what happened? And it bred worms and became putrid, and Moses became angry with them. They tried to save. It didn't help. There was nothing left for them the next day. Okay. Verse 22, just jump ahead. It came to pass on the sixth day that they gathered a double portion of bread, 2 omers for each one. Fine. They gathered double. That was what they were supposed to do. And they left that time, Friday night, they left it over till morning, and that was okay. and they were not allowed to is the verse here? Okay, I think I left it off, but there's another verse where they're not allowed to go and gather on Shabbos, and there are those who try to gather on Shabbos. So, so again, they disobey Moshe. And then finally, Moshe says, let's take some of this manna and preserve it in a flask, and future generations will be able to see this, and they will see the bread that I fed you in the desert when I took you out of the land of Egypt. And that's what they did. So Rabbi Foreman points out that this is very fascinating, right? So they're in the desert. They have no sustenance. Naturally, a person wants to be in control of their own livelihood. They don't want to have to rely on God to provide. Now, of course, God is the one who's providing for everyone, but we at least think that we're the ones providing for ourselves. But in the desert, so they had 3 rules. One is they could only gather 1 omer per person. You couldn't save over any for the next day, and on Friday you got a double portion. You were not allowed to go and gather it on Shabbos. So again, you're not in control. You have to basically follow God's providing, and that's how it's going to be. And you're not going to be able to take control on your own. So what's really fascinating about this that Rabbi Foreman points out, he says that this was almost like training wheels over here, because it's not just that they were given these laws, but they were given these laws and they weren't even able to transgress them. Meaning, if they tried, it wouldn't work. He says, everybody has to just take what they need, which is an omer per person. And if you tried to take extra, you still had an omer per person, right? Nobody's allowed to leave over till morning. Trust in God. He'll give you more tomorrow. Don't leave any over. If you tried to leave it over, it didn't stay. It became putrid, right? And you're not allowed to collect on Shabbos. And if you tried to collect on Shabbos, there wouldn't be anything there for you. So it didn't fall on Shabbos. So there's a training going on here. There's a training that says that I am the one who's providing for you. And no matter what you do to try to change that, it's not going to do anything. And so this is sort of the introduction in the desert to the concept, the idea that there it was very obvious that God was providing, but there's a message there, I think, that even once we come to the land of Israel, they say, preserve this manna in a flask, preserve the manna in a flask so that people can see it and remember that it's really God who provides. So while we're going to transfer from a setting where everything is miraculous and we're living in the miraculous desert, and it's clear and open miracle that God is providing, and there God trains us and he says, you'll try to do more, you'll try to get more than what is allotted for you. It's not going to happen. It's not going to work. So take that lesson, and later when you come to the land of Israel, that manna will still be in that flask, and you'll remember that it's God who provides for you. And as much effort as the person extends to try to get more than what God has decreed that they're supposed to get, that actually doesn't make a difference. What does make a difference only is what God has allotted for each individual person. So that's definitely some food for thought, no pun intended, to try to think about this section of our parsha this week and relate it to everything that we're talking about of, can we change what's decreed for us? There seems to be a message here from the man that certainly for them, they couldn't change whatever was decreed. And are we to take from that that's what's always the case? That's what Chovos HaLevavos seems to be saying. Again, it's hard to reconcile that with what we see in the world, but that's part of this adventure. Okay, I'll stop there.
Thank you, Rabbi.